I lay in a pool of blood, fighting for every breath to save my unborn baby, when the emergency room doctor called my mother-in-law to save her grandchild. She coldly replied that she was busy at a charity auction and hung up. She thought her secrets would die with me under the wreckage. She forgot that the true matriarch of this family had just returned to demand justice for me. My name is Abigail Hartman. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my corner office on the 42nd floor, pressing a hand against the small of my back where the ache had become a permanent resident. Below me, the city of New York sprawled out like a complex circuit board, a grid of ambition and steel that I had helped shape as the lead architect for the Apex Skyline project. I had just finalized the blueprints for a residential tower that would redefine the Upper East Side skyline. It was a career-defining moment, the kind of triumph that should have called for champagne and a celebration. Instead, I was checking my watch with a sense of rising panic that tightened my chest more than the physical constriction of my third trimester. It was 3 p.m. I was exactly 8 months pregnant. My ankles were swollen to the size of grapefruits, and I was terrified of being late for tea. I grabbed my coat, ignoring the sharp kick against my ribs from the baby girl growing inside me. She was active today, restless, as if she could sense the anxiety coursing through my bloodstream. I left the accolades of my team behind, trading the respect of my peers for the role I was expected to play the moment I crossed the threshold of the Sterling estate, the lucky, unworthy girl who had married above her station. The traffic on Fifth Avenue was a nightmare, a river of red taillights that seemed designed to torment me. By the time my taxi pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Sterling family manor, my watch read 5 minutes past 4. Just 5 minutes. In the world of construction, 5 minutes was a rounding error. In the world of Victoria Sterling, 5 minutes was a declaration of war. The house itself was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture, a stone behemoth that projected old money and timeless elegance. Ivy crawled up the gray facade, and the manicured lawns were green enough to look artificial. To the outside world, this house was a symbol of the Sterling legacy, a fortress of wealth that had stood for generations. Only I knew that the fortress was built on sand, and that I was the only thing keeping the walls from collapsing inward. I waddled as fast as my body would allow toward the conservatory, where the tea party was already in full swing, the sound of crystal clinking against fine china and the low murmur of polite, predatory conversation drifted through the open French doors. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the table, bathed in the afternoon sunlight that filtered through the glass roof. She looked, as always, immaculate. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than my junior architects made in a month, and her pearl necklace caught the light with a soft, expensive luster. She was 60 years old but looked 40, thanks to a regimen of treatments that I paid for. When I stepped into the room, the conversation died instantly. All eyes turned to me. Victoria slowly lowered her teacup, the porcelain making a sharp click as it met the saucer. She checked the diamond watch on her wrist, a gift I had bought her for her last birthday, to replace the one she had pawned, and offered me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You are late, Abigail," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, and laced with venom. "We were beginning to worry that you had gotten lost on your way from work. Although, I suppose when one works for a living, punctuality is a flexible concept." The women around the table tittered politely. They were the wives of bankers, senators, and heirs, women who had never worked a day in their lives. "I am so sorry, Victoria," I said, fighting the urge to apologize for existing. The traffic coming out of Midtown was impossible, and we had to finalize the Apex submission. Victoria waved a manicured hand, dismissing my career as if it were a quaint hobby. "Work, always work. Sit down. Dear, you look flushed. It really is not dignified for a woman in your condition to be running around construction sites." I sat in the only empty chair, feeling the weight of their judgment. The tea service was elaborate 3 tiers of imported macarons, cucumber sandwiches with the crusts cut off, and a blend of tea that cost $50 an ounce. As I reached for a napkin, The irony settled in my stomach like a stone. I had paid for the tea. I had paid for the macarons. I had paid for the gardener who trimmed the roses visible through the glass. I paid the mortgage on this drafty mansion that Victoria insisted on keeping despite not having the income to heat it. The secret of the Sterling family was a heavy shroud that I wore every day. To the public, they were an American aristocracy. In reality, the family fortune had been squandered a decade ago by Victoria's late husband and her own gambling addiction when I married Ethan 5 years ago. I thought I was marrying into stability. Within 6 months, I learned the truth. The bank accounts were empty, the creditors were circling. I loved Ethan. I loved him with a blindness that now, looking back, seemed almost pathological. He was a brilliant surgeon, kind and gentle, but he was paralyzed by his mother. He could repair a heart valve, but he could not tell Victoria no. So, I had stepped in. I was the daughter of a successful real estate mogul, and when my father passed, he left me a substantial inheritance. For 5 years, I had been bleeding that inheritance dry. $600,000. That was the number running through my head as I took a sip of the lukewarm tea. I had poured $600,000 into the black hole of Victoria's vanity. I paid off her baccarat debts in Atlantic City. I paid for the maintenance of the vintage cars she refused to sell. I kept the lights on and the facade polished so that Victoria could sit here, in this conservatory, and sneer at me. So, Abigail, Mrs. Vanderbilt was saying, her eyes scanning my simple maternity dress with disdain. Victoria tells us you are planning to take a very short maternity leave. Is that true? I forced a smile. Yes. Well, the Apex project breaks ground in 2 months. I need to be on site to oversee the structural integrity tests. Victoria sighed. A dramatic, tragic sound. It is just so hard for us to understand. In our family, mothers prioritize the home, but then Abigail comes from a different background. She is used to hustling. We must be charitable. Ladies, not everyone has the luxury of tradition. She leaned in, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence, though she meant for me to hear every word. Honestly, it is a miracle she caught my Ethan. The poor boy has such a soft heart for strays. I tell him all the time. He rescued her from a life of mediocrity. We are just happy we could give her some polish. My grip tightened on the handle of the teacup until my knuckles turned white. Rescued me. I was the one keeping this family from being evicted. I was the one who ensured Ethan did not have to drop out of his residency because his mother had gambled away his tuition funds. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, send the expensive china crashing to the stone floor, and produce the bank statements I kept hidden in my home office. I wanted to show these women that the diamond earrings Victoria was wearing were bought with my bonus check from last year. But I didn't. I sat there and took it, just like I always did, because I loved Ethan, and Ethan begged me to keep the peace. Mama is just stressed, he would say, rubbing my shoulders after a long day. She defines herself by her standing. Abi, if she loses that, it will kill her. Please, just bear with it a little longer. A little longer had turned into 5 years. My phone buzzed in my purse, vibrating against the leg of the table. I ignored it, not wanting to give Victoria another reason to lecture me on etiquette, but it buzzed again, and again, a persistent, urgent rhythm. "Excuse me," I murmured, pulling the device out. I glanced at the screen, expecting an emergency from the construction site. It was a notification from my bank, a fraud alert. Transaction authorized, $50,000 to Royal Caribbean Luxury Cruises. The air left my lungs, the world tilted on its axis. $50,000. That was the money I had set aside for the baby's nursery and the hospital bills. That was the emergency fund I had sworn not to touch. I looked up, my eyes locking on Victoria. She was laughing at something Mrs. Vanderbilt had said, looking radiant and carefree. She caught my stare and raised an eyebrow. A challenge in her eyes. She knew. She knew I had seen it. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The conversation stopped again. "I need to speak with you. Victoria. Now." Victoria didn't flinch. Abigail, do not be rude. We are entertaining. Now, I repeated, my voice shaking with a rage I could no longer suppress. She sighed, putting on a show of long-suffering patience for her guests. Excuse me, ladies? Hormones, you know. She gets so emotional. She led me into the hallway, away from the ears of her friends, but not far enough for true privacy. She turned to me, her face hardening instantly. The mask of the gracious hostess dropped, revealing the cold, calculating woman underneath. What is the meaning of this scene, she hissed. You are embarrassing me. You stole my credit card, I whispered, holding the phone up to her face. $50,000. Victoria. A luxury cruise. Are you insane? That is for your grandchild. Victoria scoffed, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. Don't be melodramatic. I needed a vacation. The stress of the gala season has been overwhelming. Besides, I knew you would pay for it eventually. I just expedited the process. You committed fraud. I booked that money for the hospital. What if there are complications? What if the baby needs care? Oh, please, she sneered. You have plenty of money. Your father left you a fortune. Stop acting like a miser. It is unbecoming. My father worked himself to death for that money, I snapped, and I work 60 hours a week to keep this roof over your head. I am done. Victoria, I am canceling the transaction. Victoria took a step closer, invading my personal space. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 and malice. You will do no such thing, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. If you cancel that transaction, the card will be declined. The travel agent is a personal friend of Mrs. Vanderbilt. If the card is declined, everyone will know. Do you want that? Do you want everyone to know that the Sterling family cannot pay its bills? I don't care anymore, I cried, though the tears were starting to sting my eyes. You should care, she countered. Think about Ethan. He is finally gaining respect at the hospital. If the rumor gets out that his mother is broke, that his wife is cutting off funds, how do you think that looks for him? In our world, perception is reality. Abigail, if you humiliate me, you humiliate him. She poked a sharp fingernail against my chest, right above my beating heart. And do you want my grandchild to be born into a scandal? Do you want her to be the daughter of a laughingstock? I did this for the family reputation. You should be thanking me for keeping up appearances. I stared at her, unable to comprehend the depth of her delusion. She truly believed it. She believed that her theft was a noble act of preservation. She was holding my husband's career and my child's social standing hostage to fund her hedonism. Just then, the front door opened. Ethan walked in, looking exhausted, his scrubs wrinkled. He stopped when he saw us, sensing the tension immediately. Hey, he said, his voice wary. What is going on? I could hear voices from the driveway. Ethan, I said, turning to him, desperate for an ally. Your mother stole $50,000 from our savings account to book a cruise. Ethan looked at me, then at his mother. Victoria immediately crumbled, her face contorting into a mask of fragile victimhood. Oh, Ethan, she wailed, bringing a hand to her forehead. I just wanted to do something nice for myself. I have been so lonely since your father died. And Abigail, she is attacking me. She called me a thief. Ethan sighed, his shoulders slumping. He looked at me with pleading eyes, the look I knew so well, the look that asked me to be the bigger person. Abby. Honey, he said softly, Mom has been having a hard time lately. It is the anniversary of Dad's death coming up. She is not thinking clearly. She stole $50,000. Ethan, I shouted, that is not grief. That is a felony. Lower your voice, he hissed, looking toward the conservatory. Please, we can figure this out. We can move some money around. Just don't make a scene right now. She is fragile. I looked at my husband, the man I loved, and I saw a stranger. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting the monster who was devouring us. He was asking me to swallow another injustice because it was easier than facing her. Victoria smirked behind her hand, a small, triumphant twitch of her lips that only I could see. She had won, again. I felt a sudden sharp pain in my abdomen, a contraction brought on by stress. I gasped, clutching my belly. Ethan stepped forward, concerned, finally breaking through his passivity. I held up a hand, stopping him. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice trembling. I looked at Victoria, who was now fixing her hair in the hallway mirror, unbothered. "Fine," I said. "Keep the cruise." Victoria beamed. "See? Ethan, I knew she would be reasonable. But," I continued, my voice gaining a steel edge I didn't know I possessed, "this is the last time. Once this baby is born, the Bank of Abigail is closed. I am separating our finances. I am selling the apartment uptown. And I am done paying for your lies." Victoria rolled her eyes. "We will see. Dear, we will see. Now, fix your face. You look haggard. We have guests to say goodbye to." She turned and floated back into the conservatory. Ethan stood there, looking helpless. "Abby, you don't mean that," he whispered. "You know she can't survive on her own." "Then maybe she should learn," I said. I walked past him, climbing the grand staircase to the guest room we stayed in when we visited. Every step was a battle against gravity and exhaustion. My body felt heavy, not just with the weight of the child, but with the crushing realization that I was alone. I entered the room and locked the door. I sank onto the bed, burying my face in my hands. The room was cold, decorated in impersonal shades of beige. I rubbed my belly, feeling the rhythmic hiccups of my daughter. "I am sorry," I whispered to her in the darkness. "I am so sorry I brought you into this nest of vipers." I closed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones. I was the chief architect of Apex Skyline. I commanded crews of hundreds of men. I managed budgets in the millions. But in this house, I was nothing but a checkbook. I made a promise then. In the silence of that cold room, I would endure this for one more month. I would give birth to my daughter safely. And then, the moment I was strong enough to stand, I would burn this arrangement to the ground. I would take my child and leave. I would stop the payments. I would let the Sterling facade crumble into dust. I didn't know then that fate and Victoria Sterling had other plans. I didn't know that I wouldn't get the chance to leave on my own terms. As I drifted into a fitful sleep, I had no idea that the check I had just mentally written was one that would cost me far more than money. It would almost cost me my life. The ringtone of the landline in the Sterling library was a sound I had learned to dread. It was an antique rotary phone, kept purely for aesthetic pretension. But it was the only line Madame Rose Sterling used when she called from her estate in Zurich. When that shrill mechanical bell echoed through the halls on a Tuesday morning, the temperature in the house seemed to drop 10 degrees. I was in the kitchen, trying to force down a bowl of oatmeal while reviewing the structural load reports for the Apex Tower. Victoria was across the hall in the sunroom, arranging hydrangeas with a manic sort of precision. When the phone rang, she froze. The stems of the flowers snapped in her grip. She did not move to answer it. The maid, a terrified girl named Maria, picked up the receiver. "It is Madame Rose, ma'am," Maria whispered, holding the phone out like it was a loaded gun. Victoria wiped her hands on her silk apron, her face draining of color. I watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame, my hand resting protectively on my stomach. I had not spoken a civil word to my mother-in-law since the incident with the credit card 3 days ago. The air between us was toxic, thick with unspoken resentments. Victoria took the phone. "Hello, Mother Sterling." I could not hear the voice on the other end, but I saw the effect it had. Victoria's posture collapsed. She hunched over, nodding rapidly, her voice turning into a high-pitched whine of deference. "Next week. But we thought, yes, of course. No, everything is in order. The account's perfectly managed. We are so excited to see you." She hung up the phone and turned to me. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with sheer, unadulterated panic. "She is coming back," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. "She is cutting her trip short. She will be here in 3 days." So I asked, taking a sip of water. It is her house, Victoria. She has a right to visit. You do not understand, Victoria shrieked, abandoning her composure entirely. She is coming to audit the family trust. She knows something is wrong. If she looks at the books, if she sees the withdrawals, she will cut me off. She will throw me onto the street. That sounds like a consequence of your own actions, I said calmly, though my heart began to race. Madame Rose was the only person Victoria feared. The matriarch was 85 years old, sharp as a tack, and possessed a moral compass that Victoria had clearly missed out on genetically. Victoria marched toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh. You have to help me. Abigail. I pulled my arm away. I am done helping you. No, listen to me. She ran to the desk in the corner of the library and began rummaging through a drawer. She pulled out a piece of paper, a legal document she had clearly prepared in advance, anticipating this day. She slammed it onto the kitchen counter in front of me. Sign this. I looked down at the document. It was a loan acknowledgement, a confession of debt. It stated that I, Abigail Hartman, had borrowed $600,000 from the Sterling Family Trust for high-risk personal investments that had subsequently failed. It absolved Victoria of any wrongdoing and placed the entire financial black hole squarely on my shoulders. Are you out of your mind? I asked, looking at her with genuine disbelief. You want me to tell your grandmother that I lost the money you spent on gambling and jewelry. It is the only way, Victoria pleaded, her eyes wild. She likes you. She respects your career. If you say it was a bad investment, she will forgive it. She calls it tuition for life. But if she knows I spent it on baccarat and trips, she will disown Ethan. Do you want that? Do you want your husband to lose his inheritance because you were too proud to sign a piece of paper? I pushed the paper back toward her. I am not signing that. I am not taking the fall for your crimes. Victoria, not this time. Victoria's face changed. The desperation evaporated, replaced by a cold reptilian stillness that was far more terrifying. She straightened her spine and smoothed her hair. If you do not sign it, she said softly, I will ruin you. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. How by telling your bridge club I am cheap, well ahead. No, Victoria said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. I will tell everyone that the baby is not Ethan's. The room went silent. The only sound was the humming of the refrigerator. Excuse me, I whispered. I will tell them you had an affair with one of your contractors. She continued, examining her fingernails. I will say I have proof, texts, emails. I can have them forged in an hour. In your industry, reputation is everything, isn't it? A female architect sleeping her way to the top? It is a cliché, but people love to believe it. Apex Skyline will fire you to avoid the scandal. You will lose your license. You will lose everything. You are a monster, I breathed, feeling bile rise in my throat. I am a mother protecting her family, she countered. Sign the paper, Abigail, or I burn your life to the ground. At that exact moment, the front door opened. Ethan walked in, carrying his gym bag. He stopped, seeing the tension in the room. What is going on? He asked, looking between us. Victoria immediately covered her face with her hands and let out a sob. A fake, theatrical sob that made my stomach turn. I asked Abigail for a small favor. She cried, her voice muffled, to help me with the paperwork for Grandma Rose. And she started screaming at me. She said she hopes I die in the street. That is a lie, I shouted, turning to Ethan. She is trying to blackmail me into taking the blame for her theft. Ethan looked at the paper on the counter, then at his mother's shaking shoulders. He didn't read the document. He didn't ask for details. He just looked at me with exhaustion etched into his features. Abigail, please, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Why do you have to be so difficult? Grandma is coming. Mom is terrified. Can't you just put your pride aside for 5 minutes and help her? You know how scared she is of Grandma Rose? I stared at him. He wasn't malicious. He was just weak. He had been conditioned since birth to prioritize his mother's emotions over reality, But in that moment, his weakness felt like a betrayal sharper than any knife. "Read the paper." "Ethan," I said, pointing at the document. "Read what she wants me to sign." "It is just paperwork," Victoria wailed louder. "She is trying to stress me out so I have a heart attack." Ethan sighed and rubbed his temples. "I don't want to read it. Abby, I just want peace in this house. Just sign the damn thing so we can have dinner." I grabbed the paper and tore it in half. Then I tore it again. I threw the confetti of lies into Victoria's face. "I will not," I said, my voice shaking with rage. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them behind Victoria's fake sobbing and Ethan's useless apologies. I went upstairs to my office and locked the door. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold my phone. I dialed the number for my personal attorney, a man named Mr. Sterling, no relation. Thankfully. "I need to separate my assets." I told him the moment he answered, immediately, and I need to draft a custody agreement. As I sat there, listening to the lawyer explain the complexities of divorce in New York, my mind drifted back. It was a defense mechanism, I suppose. I retreated into the past to find a moment where things made sense. I was back in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. It was my wedding day. I was wearing a dress that cost $20,000, smiling until my cheeks hurt. The reception was a blur of faces, but one moment stood out with crystal clarity. I was sitting at the head table when Madame Rose approached me. She was 80 years old then, leaning on an ebony cane topped with silver. She wore black, even at a wedding, and her eyes were like lasers cutting through the nonsense. She had taken my hand. Her skin was like dry parchment, but her grip was iron. "Abigail," she had said, her voice a rasp that carried over the music, "you are a smart girl. You have built skyscrapers, but you are building your life on a fault line." I laughed, thinking she was joking. "What do you mean?" Madame Rose. "You love too much," she had whispered, leaning in close so Ethan couldn't hear. "You think your love can fix broken people? It cannot. Victoria is a black hole. Ethan is a moth. Do not let your kindness become your weakness, child. When the time comes, remember that you are the architect. You can condemn the building before it falls on you." The memory faded, leaving me in the cold reality of the guest bedroom. Madame Rose had known. She had warned me 5 years ago, and I had been too arrogant, too in love, to listen. Now, she is coming back. Was she coming to save the building, or to watch it collapse? The week that followed was a blur of silent treatments and closed doors, but Victoria was not done with me. She had one final performance to execute before Madame Rose arrived. The baby shower. It was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I had begged to cancel it. I felt heavy. My back ached constantly, and my blood pressure was creeping up into the danger zone, but Victoria insisted. "We have invited the board of directors from the hospital," she said, "and the partners from your father's old firm. We cannot cancel. It would look unstable." So, I was stuffed into a maternity gown that was too tight, painted with makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes, and paraded out into the garden like a show pony. The party was a grotesque display of wealth we didn't have. There were ice sculptures in the shape of swans. There was a string quartet playing Mozart. The centerpieces were orchids imported from Thailand. It must have cost $30,000 money I knew Victoria had charged to the credit card she had promised to stop using. I stood by the entrance for 2 hours, shaking hands with people I barely knew. They congratulated me, but their eyes were on Victoria, who was holding court in the center of the lawn, accepting gifts on my behalf. "Oh, look at this cashmere blanket," she exclaimed, holding up a gift from a senator's wife. "My granddaughter will only have the best." She didn't ask me how I felt. She didn't offer me a chair. When I tried to sit down on a bench near the fountain, she rushed over, her smile fixed and terrifying. "Get up," she hissed through her teeth. "The photographer from Society New York is here. We need a photo of the cake. Do not look so miserable. You look like a ghost." "I am in pain." "Victoria," I whispered, clutching my side. A sharp, cramping sensation was radiating through my lower back. "I need to sit down. I think I need water." "You can drink water after the photos," she commanded, gripping my elbow and hoisting me up. "Stop being so dramatic. It is just a party." She dragged me toward the 3-tiered cake. The camera flashed, blinding me. Flash, flash, flash. Each burst of light felt like a physical blow. I smiled because I was trained to smile. I posed because I was too exhausted to fight. Ethan was nowhere to be found. He was likely at the bar, drowning his guilt in scotch, avoiding the crossfire between his mother and his wife. As the photographer adjusted his lens, a wave of dizziness hit me. The garden spun. The chatter of the guests warped into a dull roar. I felt a contraction, stronger than the ones before, tightening my belly like a vice. "Victoria," I gasped. "Something is wrong." She didn't even look at me. She was looking at the camera, tilting her head to her good side. "Just one more," she said. "Chin up, Abigail. I look happy. This is the happiest day of your life." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the emptiness Madame Rose had warned me about. There was no love in her eyes. There was no concern for the grandchild she claimed to adore. There was only the desperate, clawing need to be seen, to be admired, to be relevant. I was not a person to her. I was a prop. My daughter was not a life. She was an accessory. The camera flashed one last time, capturing the image of a perfect family, but inside, I was screaming. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the clarity that was dawning in my mind. I was alone. The warning from the past had become the reality of the present. Madame Rose was coming, but she wasn't here yet. And as the sun began to set over the manicured lawn, casting long, distorted shadows across the grass, I felt a shiver of pure dread. The storm was coming. Not just the blizzard that the weather forecasters were predicting for tonight, but a storm that would tear this family apart. And I was standing right in the center of it, with no shelter but my own breaking heart. I excused myself to the bathroom, clutching the walls for support. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was pale, terrified, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Anger, cold, hard anger. "If I survive this," I whispered to myself, "if my daughter survives this, no more." I didn't know then that the countdown had already begun. I didn't know that within 6 hours, the champagne and the orchids would be replaced by the screech of tires and the smell of gasoline. The curtain was falling on the act, and the tragedy was about to begin. The snow started falling at noon, but by 9 at night, New York City had vanished behind a curtain of white static. I was the last one left on the 42nd floor of the Apex Skyline building. The emergency lights were humming, casting long, eerie shadows across the drafting tables. I should have been home hours ago. I should have been sitting by the fire, elevating my swollen feet, perhaps listening to Ethan read a book to my belly. Instead, I was standing over a blueprint that had been red flagged by the structural engineers only 4 hours earlier. A miscalculation in the load-bearing columns of the atrium. A mistake that could have cost lives if the concrete had been poured next week. I fixed it. It took me 3 hours of frantic calculations and a headache that throbbed behind my eyes like a second heartbeat. But I fixed it. I signed off on the digital file and closed my laptop. The silence of the office was heavy. My phone sat on the desk, silent. I had tried calling Ethan twice, both times. It went straight to voicemail. He was on the trauma rotation tonight. He was likely deep inside someone's chest cavity, saving a life, completely unaware that his wife was standing in a dark office tower, feeling a strange, hollow ache in her lower back. I put on my coat. It was a heavy wool trench, but it wouldn't button over my stomach anymore. I wrapped a scarf around my neck, grabbed my bag, and walked to the elevator. The ride down was smooth, but my hands were shaking. It was just exhaustion. I told myself, it was just the residual adrenaline from the crisis at work. It was just the lingering toxicity of the baby shower from 3 days ago. I walked out into the lobby. The night watchman, an older man named Jerry, looked up from his monitor. "Mrs. Hartman," he said, looking concerned. "It is nasty out there. The governor just declared a state of emergency. Are you sure you do not want to wait? I can make you coffee." I shook my head. I have to get home. Jerry, my husband, is on shift. I just want to sleep in my own bed. Be careful, he warned. The roads are ice rinks. I walked out into the biting cold. The wind hit me like a physical slap, stealing the breath from my lungs, my car. A sturdy SUV I had bought specifically for its safety rating was parked in the executive lot. It was covered in 6 inches of snow. I spent 10 minutes clearing the windshield, my fingers growing numb inside my gloves. The physical exertion made the ache in my back sharpen into a distinct cramp. I paused, leaning against the cold metal of the car door, breathing through my nose. "It is just Braxton Hicks," I whispered to the darkness. "Just practice contractions. Not yet, baby girl, not tonight." I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The heater roared to life, but I couldn't stop shivering. I pulled out of the lot and merged onto the highway. The world was reduced to the cone of my headlights. The snow was coming down horizontally, driven by a fierce wind. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The highway, usually a river of light, was dark and treacherous. There were very few cars. Sensible people were at home. I drove slowly, 20 miles per hour. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The radio was off. I needed total concentration. My phone, sitting in the cup holder, lit up. A text from Victoria. "Make sure you transfer the payment for the caterers by tomorrow morning. They are threatening to sue." I stared at the screen for a split second, a surge of pure hatred rising in my chest. Even in a blizzard, even at night, she was a vulture picking at my bones. I looked back at the road. And then I saw it. It was not a car, it was a wall. A massive 18-wheeler truck, coming from the opposite direction, had hit a patch of black ice. It was jackknifed. The trailer swung out, crossing the median, sliding sideways across the asphalt like a scythe clearing a field. It was coming straight for me. There was no time to think, no time to bargain with God. There was only instinct. I slammed on the brakes. The anti-lock system stuttered, pulsing under my foot. But on the ice, it was useless. My car was a sled. I spun the wheel to the right, aiming for the guardrail, aiming for anything other than the terrifying mass of steel sliding toward me. It was not enough. The impact was not a sound. It was a physical force that rearranged the world. Metal screamed. Glass exploded inward. A diamond shower that turned into shrapnel. The airbag deployed with the force of a cannon shot, punching me in the face, burning my skin. The seatbelt locked, digging into my chest, snapping tight across my collarbone. But the worst pain was lower. The steering column collapsed. The dashboard crumbled. The front of the SUV crumpled like wet cardboard. Something slammed into my stomach. The world flipped upside down. The car rolled. Once, twice, the ceiling became the floor. The floor became the ceiling. Gravity lost its meaning. Then, silence. Absolute, ringing silence. I was hanging upside down. The seatbelt was the only thing holding me in place. The blood rushed to my head, pounding in my ears. I tried to breathe, but my lungs refused to expand. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur from the airbag and the sharp, metallic tang of gasoline. "Move," I told myself. "You have to move." I tried to lift my arm. Agony shot through my shoulder, white-hot and blinding. My left arm was broken. I could see the bone pressing against the skin of my coat. I looked down, or what I thought was down. My legs were pinned. The dashboard had crushed them against the seat. I could not feel my feet, but I could feel my stomach. It was a pain unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just physical, it was primal. It was a tearing sensation, deep inside, as if the connection between my body and my child was being severed. "No," I gasped. The sound was a wet gurgle. Blood was trickling into my mouth from a cut on my forehead. I looked for my phone, my lifeline. It had been thrown from the cup holder. I saw it, lying on the roof of the car, which was now the floor, about 3 feet away. The screen was cracked, but it was glowing. The notification from Victoria was still there. Payment for the caterers. I reached out with my right hand. My fingers brushed the shattered glass of the windshield. I stretched, straining against the seatbelt that was crushing my ribs. I touched the phone case. I dragged it toward me. My vision was blurring. Black spots were dancing at the edges of my sight. The cold was rushing in through the broken windows, freezing the blood on my face. I unlocked the screen. My fingers were slippery with red fluid. I pressed the speed dial for Ethan. It rang. Ring. Come on, Ethan, please. Ring. Pick up. I am dying. We are dying. Ring. You have reached Dr. Ethan Sterling. I am currently with a patient or in surgery. Please leave a message. I let the phone drop. I didn't have the strength to leave a message. I didn't have a breath. I closed my eyes. The snow was drifting into the car now, settling on my eyelashes. It felt peaceful. It felt like sleep. No. The scream was in my head. You cannot sleep. If you sleep, she dies. I heard sirens, faint at first, then louder, a wailing chorus cutting through the storm. Blue and red lights flashed against the snow, creating a strobe effect on the crushed metal around me. Voices, shouting. Over here. There is a car in the ditch. I tried to yell, but only a whimper came out. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding me. A face appeared in the broken window. A firefighter. Ma'am, can you hear me? My baby, I whispered. My voice was a broken rasp. Save my baby. He turned his head, shouting to someone behind him. We have a pregnant female trapped, critical condition. Get the jaws, move. The next 10 minutes were a blur of noise and violence. The screech of the hydraulic cutters tearing the door off, the hands grabbing me, the cervical collar snapping around my neck. They cut the seatbelt, I fell, and the pain caused me to black out for a second. When I opened my eyes, I was on a stretcher, being wheeled through the snow. The wind was howling, trying to tear the blankets off me. Stay with us, ma'am, a paramedic shouted, leaning over me. What is your name? Abigail, I choked out. 32 weeks. I know. Abigail, we are taking you to Mount Sinai. Just hold on. They lifted me into the back of the ambulance. It was warm inside, bright and smelling of antiseptic. They started cutting off my clothes. Scissors snipped through my coat, my sweater. I felt the cold gel of an ultrasound probe on my stomach. I watched the paramedic's face. I saw his eyes widen. I saw the look he exchanged with his partner. What I asked, the word was barely a breath. Is she okay? He didn't answer. He grabbed a radio. This is Unit 4. We are inbound with a Priority 1 trauma. 32-year-old female, unrestrained rollover, 3rd trimester pregnancy, fetal heart rate is decelerating. We have bradycardia. Repeat, fetal distress. Mother is hypotensive. BP is 60/40. We need the OR prepped now. Bradycardia. Slow heart rate. She was dying. I tried to sit up, but straps held me down. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded my veins, replacing the blood I was losing. Ethan, I begged. Call Ethan. We will call him at the hospital, the paramedic said, pushing a needle into my arm. Just breathe, Abigail. The ambulance ride was a nightmare of bumps and turns. Every vibration sent shockwaves of agony through my shattered legs and my bleeding womb. I stared at the ceiling, counting the lights, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Take me. Don't take her. Take me. We slammed to a stop. The doors flew open. I was rushed into a world of white tiles and masked faces. The emergency room. Trauma 1, coming through. Doctors swarmed me like ants. Hands were everywhere, checking pupils, listening to lungs, palpating my stomach. Get the portable ultrasound. Type and crossmatch, 6 units of O negative. Page OBGYN, get the NICU team down here. A doctor with gray hair and kind eyes leaned over me. He was shouting orders, but when he looked at me, his voice was calm. Abigail, I am Dr. Evans. Can you hear me? Yes, I gasped. We need to operate. Abigail, your placenta has detached from the uterine wall. Your baby is not getting oxygen. We have to get her out right now. Do it, I whispered. We need consent. He said, urgency creeping into his tone. And we need to know if there are other injuries. Who is your family? Is your husband here? Ethan. I said, Ethan Sterling. He works at Presbyterian. The nurse in the corner was already on the phone. I am calling Presbyterian, she shouted. Paging Dr. Sterling. I lay there, feeling the life draining out of me. The cold was spreading from my toes up to my chest. The lights were getting dimmer. Seconds ticked by. Each second was a lifetime. Each second was a heartbeat my daughter might not have. The nurse looked up, her face grim. He is not answering his page, she yelled. He is in deep surgery. They cannot patch him through. I have to operate, doctor, Evans yelled. But her pressure is tanking. If I put her under, she might not wake up. I need a next of kin to authorize the risk. I need someone to make the call if we have to choose between the mother and the child. Try the second number, doctor, Evans commanded. Look in her phone. Who is the emergency contact? The nurse grabbed my shattered phone. It was still unlocked. Blood smeared on the screen. She scrolled. Here, she shouted, emergency contact 2, listed as mother-in-law, Victoria Sterling. Call her doctor, Evans ordered. Put it on speaker. I tried to speak. I tried to warn them. I tried to say no. Not her. Anyone but her. But my voice was gone. The darkness was pulling me under. The nurse hit the dial button. The ringing sound echoed through the trauma room, amplified by the speakerphone. Ring. Ring. Hello? Victoria's voice filled the room. It was not the voice of a worried grandmother. It was annoying. There was background noise, classical music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. This is Dr. Evans from Mount Sinai Emergency Room, the doctor shouted, leaning over the phone while keeping pressure on my abdomen. Am I speaking to Victoria Sterling? Yes, Victoria replied, her tone dripping with irritation. Who is this I am in the middle of a very important auction? Mrs. Sterling, your daughter-in-law Abigail has been in a catastrophic car accident. She is critical. We need to perform an emergency C-section immediately to save the baby. But the mother is unstable. We need your consent to proceed. Her husband is unreachable. There was a pause that lasted long enough for a monitor to beep a warning. Abigail Victoria's voice came through, clear and cold. Is she conscious? She is drifting, the doctor said. Mrs. Sterling, we are losing time. If we do not operate in the next 3 minutes, the baby will die. Abigail might die. We need you to come here. We need you to authorize this. I heard Victoria sigh, a long, exasperated sigh. I cannot leave right now, she said. I am the chair of the gala. I am about to present the diamond necklace. The room went silent. The nurses stopped moving for a split second. Doctor? Evans looked at the phone as if it were a bomb. Ma'am, did you hear me? The doctor barked, his professionalism cracking. This is life or death. Your granddaughter is dying. Don't be dramatic, Victoria snapped. Abigail always exaggerates. She is probably just bruised. Look, if she dies, call me back. But right now, I have donors to attend to. Don't call this number again. Click. The line went dead. The silence in the trauma room was absolute. It was heavier than the snow, colder than the blizzard. Doctor? Evans stared at the phone. The nurse looked at me with eyes full of horror. I felt a tear slide down my temple, mixing with the blood in my hair. She had left us. She had actually left us to die. Doctor. Evans threw the phone onto a tray. It landed with a crash. To hell with the consent, he roared. Prepping for crash. C-section, we are doing this on implied consent. Move, people, move. Get the anesthesia. Cut the clothes. I felt the mask descend over my face. The gas smelled sweet and chemical. The last thing I heard was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, slowing down. Beep, beep, beep. The last thing I saw was the white ceiling and the memory of Victoria's voice. Don't call this number again. And then, there was nothing. No pain, no cold. Just the terrifying, bottomless dark. While I was bleeding out on a cold gurney under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room, a very different scene was unfolding 5 miles away. I know this now. I know every detail of it with a clarity that haunts my nightmares. I know the song the orchestra was playing. I know the vintage of the champagne being poured. And most damning of all, I know exactly what was said in the shadowed corner of the ballroom at the Pierre Hotel. The annual Winter Gala was the pinnacle of the social season in Manhattan. It was an event where the air smelled of expensive perfume and old money, a place where charity was just a tax write-off and a reason to wear diamonds. Victoria Sterling was in her element. She was the chairwoman of the auction committee this year, a position she had fought for with the ferocity of a starving wolf. She stood near the center of the ballroom, holding a crystal flute of champagne, basking in the adoration of the city's elite. She looked magnificent. She was wearing a custom-made emerald green silk gown that draped over her body like liquid money. It was a dress that cost $7,000. I knew the price because I was the one who had wired the money to the designer in Milan 3 weeks earlier. I had paid for the fabric that clothed the woman who would soon leave me to die. Victoria was laughing at a joke made by a senator, tilting her head back to expose the long, elegant line of her neck. She felt powerful. She felt secure. For the first time in years, she felt like the queen she believed herself to be, unencumbered by the nagging reality of her bankruptcy. Tonight, she was not the widow with the empty bank account. She was Victoria Sterling, the philanthropist, the matriarch, the woman of the hour. Then, the intrusion happened. Her clutch, a small, beaded purse resting on the high-top table beside her, began to vibrate. It was a persistent, angry buzz that rattled against the glass surface. Victoria frowned. She ignored it at first, hoping it would stop. She was in the middle of securing a bid for a vacation package to the Maldives. But the phone kept buzzing. It was relentless. It sliced through the ambient noise of the string quartet and the polite chatter. The senator's wife glanced at the bag. "You are popular tonight." "Victoria," she teased. Victoria forced a tight smile. "My apologies. It is probably the caterers. You know how incompetent help can be these days." She excused herself, picking up the clutch with a sharp motion of annoyance. She walked toward a quieter alcove near the velvet curtains that separated the ballroom from the service corridor. She opened the bag and looked at the screen. Abigail. The name flashed in white letters against the black background. Victoria rolled her eyes. A huff of irritation escaped her lips. Of course, it was Abigail. Probably calling to whine about the snow. Probably calling to complain that Ethan was working late again. Victoria debated letting it go to voicemail. She had made it clear she was busy tonight. She had told Abigail specifically that this evening was crucial for the family reputation. But the phone rang again immediately after stopping, and then a third time. Victoria looked around to ensure no one important was watching. She pressed the green button and lifted the phone to her ear, her voice dripping with suppressed anger. "What is it now?" "Abigail," she hissed, keeping her voice low but sharp. "I told you I'm chairing the auction. I do not have time for your neuroses tonight." There was a pause on the other end. Then, a voice spoke. It was not me. It was not the voice she expected. "Mrs. Sterling." The voice was breathless, high-pitched, and laced with panic. It was the background noise that should have tipped her off. The screaming sirens, the shouting of doctors, the rhythmic, terrifying beep of monitors. "Who is this?" Victoria demanded, her annoyance turning into defensiveness. "Why do you have my daughter-in-law's phone?" "This is Nurse Miller from Mount Sinai Trauma Center," the voice said rapidly. "We have Abigail Hartman here. She has been involved in a catastrophic vehicle collision, a rollover on the interstate." Victoria stiffened. Her hand tightened around the stem of her champagne glass. For a second, just a split second, shock registered on her face. But it was not the shock of a mother concerned for her child. It was the shock of an inconvenience. It was the shock of a plan being disrupted. "An accident," Victoria repeated, her tone skeptical. "Is she hurt?" "She is critical, ma'am," the nurse said, her voice rising in volume. "She has massive internal bleeding. Her pelvis is crushed. The baby is in severe distress. The heart rate is dropping. We need to perform an emergency crash C-section right now to get the baby out. Victoria looked back toward the ballroom. The lights were dimming. The spotlight was sweeping across the stage. The auctioneer was stepping up to the podium. The main event was starting. The auction for the Pink Star Diamond, the highlight of her career as chairwoman, was about to begin. She needed to be on that stage in 5 minutes to introduce the item. "Mrs. Sterling, are you there?" the nurse shouted. "We need you here. We need a family member to authorize the surgery and make decisions. Her husband is in surgery and cannot be reached. You are the next of kin. You have to come now." Victoria brought a hand to her forehead. She felt a headache coming on. This was typical Abigail. Always the drama. There is always chaos. "Lower your voice," Victoria snapped. "People can hear you." "Ma'am, did you hear me? She is dying. The baby is dying." Victoria stepped further into the shadows, turning her back on the party. She took a breath. Composing herself, she made a calculation. A cold, heartless calculation that weighed my life against her social standing. "Look," she said, her voice turning icy and detached. "I am sure you are exaggerating. Abigail has a very low pain threshold. She tends to make a scene out of nothing." The nurse on the other end gasped. It was a sound of pure disbelief. "I am not exaggerating. She is crashing. Her blood pressure is 60/40 if we do not cut her open in 2 minutes. There will be 2 corpses in this room." Victoria checked her diamond watch. It was 9:15. The auction started at 9:20. "I cannot leave," Victoria said firmly. "I am the host of this gala. I have 300 of New York's most influential people waiting for me to present the diamond. I cannot just walk out because Abigail slipped on some ice. She didn't slip on ice. She was crushed by a truck." "Stop shouting at me," Victoria hissed. "I am telling you, I cannot leave. I am busy." There was silence on the line, a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You are refusing to come?" the nurse asked, her voice trembling with rage. "You are refusing to save your grandchild." "I am refusing to be summoned like a servant," Victoria countered. "Do whatever you have to do. You are doctors. Do your job. But do not expect me to abandon my responsibilities here." "Mrs. Sterling, please," the nurse begged, desperation breaking through her anger. "If she dies, and you are not here. If she dies, call me back," Victoria interrupted. She said it with the casual dismissal of someone ordering a coffee. She said it without a tremor. "If she dies, call me back. Until then, do not call this number again. I have a diamond to sell." She pulled the phone away from her ear. She looked at the screen one last time. Then, she pressed the red button. Click. She stared at the phone for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she opened her clutch and dropped the device inside. She snapped the bag shut, sealing the tragedy away. She took a deep breath, smoothed the silk of her emerald gown, and adjusted her smile in the reflection of a window. She turned back toward the light. She walked back into the ballroom, her head held high, ready to charm the donors, leaving the wreckage of her family behind in the dark. Back in the trauma room at Mount Sinai, time was warping. I was floating. That was the only way to describe it. The pain that had been tearing me apart moments ago had receded into a dull, distant throb. The cold that had frozen my bones was replaced by a strange, numbing heat. I could not see much. My eyes were open, but the world was a blur of white shapes and bright lights. I could hear, though hearing is the last sense to go. They say, they are right. I heard the chaos, the clatter of metal instruments on trays, the ripping of Velcro, the rhythmic whoosh hiss of the ventilator bag they were pressing over my face. But above it all, I heard the nurse. She was standing near the foot of my bed. She had just lowered the phone. She was staring at it, her hand shaking so hard that she almost dropped it. "Doctor," Evans, she whispered. Her voice sounded hollow, broken. "Doctor." Evans was busy. He was shouting orders, his hands deep in the red ruin of my abdomen. "What did she say? Is she coming? We need consent." The nurse looked up. I could not see her face clearly, but I could hear the horror in her voice. I could hear the tears she was fighting back. She hung up. The nurse said, "What?" The doctor paused for a fraction of a second. She hung up. The nurse repeated, her voice rising to a sob. "She said she is busy. She said she is at an auction. She said if she dies, call her back." The words floated through the air and landed on my chest like lead weights. "If she dies, call her back." The room went silent. For one heartbeat, the frantic activity stopped. Every doctor, every nurse, every technician froze. They were professionals. They had seen death. They had seen cruelty. They had seen gunshot wounds and stabbings and domestic abuse. But they had never heard this. They had never heard a grandmother sentence her own blood to death for a social event. I heard it. Through the fog of anesthesia and shock, I heard it clearly. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a bad connection. It was a choice. Victoria had chosen. She had chosen the applause of strangers over the life of my daughter. She had chosen a diamond necklace over my breath. A wave of sorrow washed over me, so powerful it eclipsed the physical pain. It was a grief so deep, it felt like my soul was cracking open. I had spent 5 years trying to please this woman. I had spent my inheritance to save her dignity. I had swallowed her insults. I had protected her secrets. And in return, she had left me to die alone on a cold table. I tried to cry out. I tried to scream, but my body was no longer mine. The paralysis of the drugs and the trauma had taken over. All I could do was cry. A single tear formed in the corner of my right eye. It was hot and heavy. It slid down my temple, cutting a clean track through the blood and grime on my skin. It pooled in my ear, a tiny ocean of salt and betrayal. The doctor roared, breaking the spell. "Forget her. We move now, scalpel." I felt the pressure, the sharp, decisive line being drawn across my skin. But it didn't matter anymore. The real wound had already been inflicted. The knife in my heart was far sharper than the steel in the doctor's hand. She left us. The thoughts spiraled in my mind as the darkness rose up to claim me. She left us. My heart monitor began to slow. The beeping became a long, drawn-out drone. Beep. I saw Ethan's face in my mind. I saw the nursery I had painted yellow. I saw the little shoes I had bought just yesterday. And then I saw Victoria, laughing in her green dress, holding a glass of champagne, while I drowned in the dark. The lights went out, the sound faded, and I fell into the void, carrying nothing with me but the crushing weight of the truth. The first thing I knew was pain. It was not the sharp, screaming agony of the crash. This was a dull, heavy throbbing that seemed to live in the marrow of my bones. It was the white, sterile pain of survival. I opened my eyes. The light was too bright. It burned. I blinked, trying to clear the fog of anesthesia that coated my brain like thick wool. I was in a room, a hospital room. There were machines everywhere, humming and clicking in a rhythmic, mechanical language that meant I was alive. I tried to move, but my body refused. My left leg was encased in a heavy plaster cast, elevated on a sling. My chest felt tight, bound by bandages where the seatbelt had snapped my ribs. But the worst sensation was the hollowness in my abdomen. The emptiness. Panic surged through me, cutting through the drugs. My hands flew to my stomach. It was flat, soft, empty. My baby. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw, dry as sandpaper. All that came out was a croaking sound. A nurse appeared instantly at my side. She was young, her face kind but tired. "Mrs. Hartman, you are awake," she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You are safe. You are in the ICU." "My baby," I whispered, the words scraping against my vocal cords. "Where is she?" "She is alive," the nurse said quickly, knowing exactly what I needed to hear. "She is in the NICU. She is very small. Abigail. She was born at 32 weeks, and she suffered some distress from the crash. But she is fighting. She is a strong little girl. Alive." The word was a life raft in a stormy sea. I closed my eyes. tears leaking out and sliding into my ears. She was alive. I had not failed her completely. I lay there for hours, drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctors came and went. They told me about my injuries in clinical terms: a compound fracture of the tibia, 3 broken ribs, a ruptured spleen that they had to remove, a severe concussion, and, of course, the emergency C-section incision that burned across my lower belly like a brand. It was not until the sun began to stream through the blinds, painting stripes of light across the linoleum floor, that the door opened and my husband walked in. Ethan looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single night. He was still wearing his scrubs from the hospital, but they were wrinkled and stained with sweat. His eyes were red-rimmed, sunken into dark hollows of exhaustion. He stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked at my cast. He looked at the tubes running into my arms. He looked at the empty space where my belly used to be. And then he crumbled. He fell to his knees beside the bed, burying his face in the mattress near my hand. He sobbed. It was a raw, ugly sound, the sound of a man whose world had almost ended. "Abi," he choked out. "Oh God, Abi, I didn't know. I didn't know." I reached out with my good hand and touched his hair. It felt greasy. He hadn't showered. "I called you," I whispered. "I called you. Ethan." I was in surgery. He wept, lifting his head. His face was wet with tears. I was on a 6-hour bypass. I didn't have my phone. When I came out, when I saw the messages, I ran. I drove here at 100 miles per hour. I thought I had lost you. He grabbed my hand and kissed the knuckles, over and over again. I saw her. "Abi, I saw our daughter. She is so small. She is hooked up to so many wires. But she looks like you. She has your chin." He was shaking. He was terrified. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to comfort him. I felt a distance, a cold, hard wall of glass between us. Because while he was saving a stranger's heart, his mother had been willing to stop mine. "Where is Victoria?" I asked. The question hung in the air, sharp and cold. Ethan stiffened. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, sitting back on his heels. "Mom. She is coming. She called me this morning. She was hysterical. Abi, she feels terrible." "Does she?" I asked, my voice flat. Ethan nodded eagerly, desperate to defend the indefensible. "She had car trouble. Can you believe the bad luck? She was driving back from the suburbs, from some meeting, and her engine died in the middle of the blizzard. Her phone died too. She was stranded for hours. That is why she didn't answer the hospital. She didn't know." I stared at him. He believed it. He actually believed it. The lie was so convenient, so perfectly tailored to absolve her. And he swallowed it whole because the alternative that his mother was a monster was too painful for him to accept. I closed my eyes. I didn't have the energy to fight him. Not yet. I needed to save my strength. "She will be here around noon," Ethan said, squeezing my hand. "She wants to see you. She wants to make it right." Noon came with the brightness of a winter day. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the city covered in a blinding white blanket. At 12:15, the door to my room didn't just open. It was staged. Victoria Sterling swept into the room. She was wearing a beige cashmere coat that looked soft enough to melt, and her hair was blown out to perfection. She was holding a massive bouquet of white lilies flowers that looked more appropriate for a funeral than a recovery room. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, a man with a large camera stepped into the room. I recognized him. He was a freelance photographer for the social columns. "Oh, my poor, dear Abigail," Victoria cried out, rushing toward the bed. She didn't look at me. She looked at the camera lens reflecting in the glass of the window. She arranged her face into a mask of tragic concern. The perfect, grieving grandmother. "Get him out," I rasped. Victoria ignored me. She placed the flowers on the bedside table, effectively blocking my view of the heart monitor. "Ethan, darling, move to the side," she commanded gently. "Let me hold her hand. The lighting is better from that angle." Ethan stood up, looking confused. "Mom, what is this? Why is there a photographer? Victoria dabbed at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. We need to control the narrative. Ethan, people are talking. They are saying terrible things about why I wasn't here last night. We need to show them that the Sterling family is united in this tragedy. She reached for my hand. Her skin was cold. Her rings dug into my fingers. Smile, Abigail, she whispered through her teeth, leaning down to kiss my forehead. Do it for the baby. We need the sympathy vote for the charity fund. I yanked my hand away with every ounce of strength I had. Don't touch me, I hissed. Victoria recoiled, looking hurt for the camera's benefit. Abigail, please, I know you are in pain, but there is no need to be cruel. I suffered too last night, stranded in the cold, not knowing if my family was alive. Ethan looked at her, his face twisting with a mix of relief and frustration. Mom, where were you? Seriously, the doctor said they called you. They said you hung up. Victoria turned to him, her eyes wide and innocent. Ethan, how can you accuse me of that? I told you. My Jaguar died on the old country road. The battery was dead. My phone had no signal. I was freezing to death in a ditch while your wife was in surgery. I would have given my life to be here. She turned back to the photographer. Did you get the shot of me arranging the pillows? Ethan looked at me, helpless. See? Abby. It was just a misunderstanding, a terrible series of events. I looked at Victoria. She was preening. She was winning. She was going to spin this near murder into a PR stunt that would make her the saint of the Upper East Side. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream the truth, but the door to the room slammed open. It wasn't a gentle opening. It was an entrance. Two men in dark suits walked in first. They were large, silent, and radiated a kind of professional menace that made the photographer lower his camera instantly. They stepped to the side, clearing a path. And then she entered. Madame Rose Sterling. She was 85 years old, but she walked with the posture of a queen entering her throne room. She wore a black wool coat that reached her ankles and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over her eyes. In her right hand, she held a cane made of polished ebony, topped with a silver handle in the shape of a lion's head. She did not look at Ethan. She did not look at the photographer, and she certainly did not look at Victoria. She walked straight to my bedside. Her movements were slow but deliberate. She handed her cane to one of the bodyguards and leaned over me. Her face was a map of wrinkles, but her eyes were blue steel. They were sharp, clear, and currently filled with a fierce, protective warmth I had never seen directed at me before. Abigail, she said. Her voice was rasping but strong. Madame Rose, I whispered. She reached out and touched my cheek. Her hand was warm. I saw the child, she said quietly. She is small, but she has the Sterling nose, and she has your fighting spirit. She will live. Tears welled in my eyes again. Thank you. Madame Rose straightened up. She took her cane back. She turned slowly, pivoting on her heel until she was facing the other side of the room. The silence was absolute. The photographer was backing into the corner, looking for an exit. Ethan was standing with his mouth slightly open. And Victoria? Victoria had turned the color of ash. The bouquet of lilies she had been fussing with fell from her hand, hitting the floor with a wet slap. Grandmother Victoria stammered. Her voice was an octave higher than usual. We didn't expect you until tomorrow. Clearly, Madame Rose said. She took a step toward Victoria. The cane tapped against the linoleum. Click, click, click. Victoria took a step back. I came early, Madame Rose said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register, because I had a feeling that if I left this family to its own devices for one more day, there would be no family left to save. She looked at the photographer. Get out. The man didn't wait to be told twice. He scrambled out the door, clutching his camera like a shield. Rose turned her gaze to Victoria. It was like watching a hawk lock onto a field mouse. I heard you telling a story. Victoria, Rose said. Something about a broken-down car, a ditch, a dead phone battery. Victoria swallowed hard. Yes, grandmother. It was terrible. I was stranded in Westchester. Westchester, Rose repeated, in a blizzard, with no signal. Yes, Victoria breathed, gaining a little confidence. It was a nightmare. Madame Rose stared at her for a long moment. Then, she let out a short, dry laugh. It was a terrifying sound. You are a liar, Victoria, and a sloppy one at that. Madame Rose snapped her fingers. The lawyer standing by the door, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Henderson, stepped forward. He was holding a thick manila envelope. Victoria blanched. What is that? Madame Rose took the envelope. She didn't open it immediately. She held it, weighing it in her hand. My head of security has a very interesting way of tracking the family assets, she said conversationally, including the GPS transponders in all the family vehicles. She took a step closer to Victoria. Your Jaguar was not in a ditch in Westchester. Victoria. It was parked in the VIP garage of the Pierre Hotel from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The GPS must be broken. I lent the car to a friend. Madame Rose ignored her. And your phone, the one with the dead battery. She opened the envelope. She pulled out a stack of photographs. They were high resolution, glossy prints. She threw them onto the table at the foot of my bed. They fanned out, a colorful display of betrayal. Ethan stepped forward and looked down. I craned my neck to see. The first photo showed Victoria standing at a podium, bathed in the spotlight. She was smiling, holding a diamond necklace up to the crowd. The timestamp in the corner of the photo read 9:25 p.m., the exact moment I was being wheeled into surgery. The second photo showed her laughing with a man in a tuxedo, clinking glasses of champagne. Timestamp 10:15 p.m., the moment my daughter was being placed in an incubator. Hiding in a ditch? Madame Rose asked, her voice rising now, thundering through the small room. Or were you drinking vintage Dom Perignon at the winter gala while your daughter-in-law bled out on a table? Victoria was shaking, her composure shattered. It is not what it looks like. I had to be there. It was for the family name. I couldn't leave. You couldn't leave. Madame Rose roared. She slammed the tip of her cane onto the floor. You received a call that your grandchild was dying, and you chose to auction off a piece of glass. Ethan picked up one of the photos. His hands were trembling so violently the paper rattled. He looked at the image of his mother laughing. Then he looked at her, standing there in her expensive coat. Mom, he whispered, you were at a party. Victoria turned to him, desperate. Ethan, listen to me. The charity. The donors. I did it for us. We need the connections. Ethan looked at me. He looked at the tubes in my arms. He looked at the empty space in the bed. He dropped the photo. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. Victoria's laughing face stared up at the ceiling. Madame Rose stepped between Ethan and Victoria. She looked at her daughter-in-law with pure disgust. You are finished. Victoria, I tolerated your spending. I tolerated your vanity. I even tolerated your stupidity. But I will not tolerate this. You are not a mother. You are not a grandmother. You are a parasite. Rose turned to the lawyer. Mr. Henderson, Rose said, show her the other document. The lawyer pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is the call log from the hospital switchboard, Madame Rose said coldly. We pulled the recording. Victoria frozen. We have your voice, Victoria, Rose said. We have you telling the nurse. If she dies, call me back. Ethan let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He backed away from his mother as if she were radioactive. No, Victoria whispered. You can't have that. That is illegal. In this family, I am the law, Madame Rose said. She turned to me. Her expression softened instantly. Rest, Abigail. You do not have to worry about the hospital bills. You do not have to worry about the house. And you certainly do not have to worry about her. She pointed the tip of her cane at Victoria. Get out of my sight. Victoria, go back to that empty mansion. Pack a bag. Because when I am done here, you will wish you had actually died in that ditch. Victoria looked around the room. She looked at Ethan. who had turned his back on her. She looked at the bodyguards blocking the door. She looked at me, lying broken in the bed. For a moment, I saw the hate in her eyes, pure, undiluted malice. "This isn't over," she hissed at me. Madame Rose stepped forward, raising her cane. "It is over," she said. "Now get out before I have my men throw you out the window." Victoria turned and fled. She ran out of the room, her heels clacking frantically down the hallway, fleeing the judgment she could no longer escape. The room fell silent again. Ethan was sobbing quietly in the corner. Madame Rose walked over to the chair beside my bed and sat down. She looked tired, suddenly showing her age. She reached out and took my hand again. "I am sorry I was late, child," she whispered. I squeezed her hand, feeling the first true sense of safety I had felt in years. "You were right on time," I said. And outside the window, the sun finally broke through the clouds, shining on the snow, bright and cold and clean. The silence that had settled over the room following Madame Rose's command was short-lived. Just as the heavy door began to swing shut behind Victoria's retreating figure, one of the massive bodyguards in the hallway stepped forward, blocking her path with the immovability of a granite wall. He did not touch her, but his presence was a clear barrier. Victoria stopped, her heels skidding slightly on the polished floor. She turned back, her face a mask of panicked indignation. Realizing that her exit had been denied, she marched back into the room, deciding that if she could not flee, she would fight. She pointed a shaking finger at the photographs scattered on the floor, the glossy images of her laughing at the gala while I lay dying. "They are fakes," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. She looked wildly from Ethan to Madame Rose. "You cannot believe this. It is Photoshop. It is AI. You know how easy it is to fake these things now. Someone is trying to frame me. Someone is trying to destroy the sterling reputation." She grabbed Ethan's arm, her nails digging into his scrub top. "Ethan, look at me. Do not look at those pictures. Look at your mother. Do you think I would abandon you? Do you think I would abandon my grandchild for a party? It is a setup. Abigail probably hired someone to make these." Ethan stood frozen. I could see the war behind his eyes. He wanted to believe her. It is human nature to want to believe that the woman who gave you birth is not a sociopath. He looked down at the photos, then back at his mother's tear-stained face. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They look very real." "They are digital fabrications," Victoria insisted, gaining momentum. "I was in a ditch in Westchester, I swear on your father's grave." Madame Rose did not shout. She did not argue. She simply raised one finger, a gesture of absolute command that silenced the room instantly. She looked at Mr. Henderson, the lawyer who had been standing silently by the window like a grim reaper in a bespoke suit. The audio. "Mr. Henderson," Madame Rose said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a sounding block. Mr. Henderson nodded. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, high-fidelity digital recorder. He walked to the center of the room and placed it on the rolling table at the foot of my bed, right next to the untouched pitcher of water. Victoria's eyes widened. She took a step back, her hands clutching her throat. "What is that?" she whispered. "The truth," Madame Rose answered. Mr. Henderson pressed the play button. The sound that filled the hospital room was crystal clear. It had been enhanced, stripped of static, but the background noise was unmistakable. The swell of violins, the clinking of silverware, the low murmur of a crowd. It was the ambient sound of the winter gala. And then, the voice. "Hello." It was Victoria. There was no mistaking that haughty, impatient drawl. It was the voice she used when she was speaking to waitstaff or people she considered beneath her. Then came the nurse's voice, tight with panic. "Mrs. Sterling, this is Nurse Miller. Abigail is critical. We need your consent." I watched Ethan. He was staring at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. His face had gone completely white. The recording continued. We heard Victoria's sigh. We heard the rustle of fabric as she likely shifted the phone. "I cannot leave right now. I am the chair of the gala." The words hung in the air, suspended in the sterile silence of the room. I have 300 of New York's most influential people waiting for me. And then, the final nail in the coffin, the line that had played on a loop in my mind as I went under the anesthesia. "If she dies, call me back." Mr. Henderson pressed the stop button. The sudden silence was louder than the recording had been. Victoria stood in the center of the room, her mouth opening and closing. No sound coming out. The defense of fake photos had crumbled into dust. You cannot Photoshop a voice. You cannot fabricate the specific, terrified cadence of a nurse begging for a life. Ethan turned to his mother. The movement was slow, mechanical. He looked at her not with anger, but with a kind of horrifying clarity. It was the look of a man seeing a stranger wearing his mother's face. "You knew," he whispered. The words were barely audible. "You knew she was dying, and you told them not to bother you." Victoria reached out to him. "Ethan, please, you have to understand the pressure I was under. The diamond auction is the biggest event of the decade. If I had left, the donors would have pulled out. I did it for the foundation. I did it for the family legacy." "You left my wife to bleed to death for a necklace," Ethan said. His voice rose, cracking in the middle. "You left my daughter to die for a tax write-off." He backed away from her, hitting the wall. He slid down slightly, as if his legs could no longer support the weight of the truth. I watched them from the bed. My body was broken. My energy reserves were depleted, but a cold fire was burning in my chest. I pushed the button to raise the head of my bed. The motor whirred, lifting me into a sitting position. The pain in my abdomen flared, sharp and biting, but I ignored it. I looked at Victoria. She looked small now. The grand dame of New York society was shrinking under the glare of the fluorescent lights. 5 years, I said. My voice was raspy, weak, but it cut through the tension like a razor. Victoria snapped her head toward me, her eyes narrowing with hate. "I have paid for your life for 5 years. Victoria," I continued, clutching the side rail of the bed. "I paid off your baccarat debts in Atlantic City, $200,000. I paid for the restoration of the estate roof, $80,000. I paid for the car you claimed broke down. I paid for the dress you were wearing while you let me die." Victoria scoffed, a desperate, ugly sound. "You are delirious. You are on drugs." Madame Rose stepped forward again. She pulled another file from the lawyer's briefcase. "She is not delirious, Victoria," Rose said. "She is precise." Rose opened the file. It was a forensic accounting report, thick, detailed, and damning. "I have had my auditors going through the family accounts since I landed 3 hours ago," Rose said. "It seems you have been treating Abigail like a personal ATM." Rose tossed the file onto the bed, within my reach. $640,000, Rose stated. "That is the total amount Abigail has transferred to your personal accounts, or paid to your creditors. Over the last 60 months, she has kept you out of prison. Victoria, she has kept the wolves from the door." Ethan looked up from the floor. "Abby, is that true?" I nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I didn't want you to know. Ethan, I knew how much you loved her. I knew how much the family name meant to you. I thought if I just paid enough, she would finally love me, or at least, she would leave us alone." I looked at Victoria, who was now trembling with rage. "I paid for everything," I whispered, "but when the bill came for my daughter's life, you claimed you were bankrupt." Victoria straightened her spine, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "I am the head of this household in my husband's absence. I have a right to maintain our standard of living. Abigail should be honored to contribute to the sterling legacy." "Honored?" Madame Rose asked, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You call this honor?" Rose signaled the lawyer again. "There is one more thing," Rose said, "a little detail my auditors found this morning. Something that even Abigail does not know." I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. What could be worse than what I already knew? Rose looked at me, her expression softening with pity. "Abigail, do you know the status of the brownstone you and Ethan live in?" I frowned. "We own it. It was a wedding gift from Ethan's father. We pay the property taxes, but the deed is free and clear. Rose shook her head slowly. No, child. It was free and clear. Until 6 months ago. She pulled a document from the file. It was a bank deed. A foreclosure notice. Victoria used her power of attorney, the one she tricked Ethan into signing 3 years ago for estate management, to take out a second mortgage on your home. Rose said, she leveraged the full value of the property. $3 million. I gasped. The air left my lungs. My home. The nursery I had just finished painting. The place where I thought I was safe. $3 million, I choked out. Where is the money? Madame Rose looked at Victoria with pure contempt. Ask her. Victoria stayed silent, her chin jutting out defiantly. She put it all into a tech startup, Rose said. A sure thing she heard about at a cocktail party. The company filed for bankruptcy last week. The stock is worthless. The money is gone. Rose turned to me. The bank has already started foreclosure proceedings. Abigail, you and Ethan do not own that house anymore. You are squatters. The room spun. I grabbed the bed sheets, feeling like I was falling. Everything I had worked for. My salary from Apex Skyline, my inheritance, my home. She had taken it all. She had hollowed out my life until there was nothing left but a shell. Ethan stood up. He walked toward his mother. He walked slowly, like a man walking through deep water. You sold our house, he asked. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was dead. I didn't sell it, Victoria yelled, backing away until she hit the wall. I invested it. It was supposed to double. I was going to pay it back before you even knew I did it for you. Ethan, I did it to save the estate. You stole our home, Ethan said. You stole my wife's money, and you tried to kill my daughter. I did not try to kill her, Victoria screamed. I just prioritized it. Prioritized, Madame Rose repeated. Victoria looked around, realized she was cornered, and played her final card, the victim card. She threw her hands up, tears streaming down her face again, real tears this time, tears of self-pity. You all hate me, she wailed. You do not understand what it is like. The pressure to be sterling, the pressure to keep up appearances when there is no money left. I sacrificed my youth for this family. I sacrificed my happiness. And this is how you repay me, by ganging up on me when I made one mistake. One mistake, I said. My voice was gaining strength. I pushed the blankets off my legs. I ignored the agony in my shattered tibia. You left my baby to die. Victoria, that is not a mistake. That is a choice. I looked at Ethan. I am done. Ethan, I told you before the accident that I was done. But now I am burning the bridge. I turned to Madame Rose. You said you are the law in this family. Madame Rose, so I am asking you, what happens to a thief? Madame Rose smiled. It was a grim, wolfish smile. A thief pays back what they stole, she said, or they go to prison. Victoria gasped. Prison, you wouldn't. I am your daughter-in-law. Ex-daughter-in-law, Rose corrected. She turned to the lawyer. Mr. Henderson, call the precinct. Tell Detective Miller we have a case of fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny, and tell him we have the evidence right here. No, Victoria screamed. She lunged toward the bed, toward me. Abigail, stop them. You cannot let them arrest me. Think of the scandal. Think of the baby. Ethan stepped in front of her. He didn't push her. He just stood there, a wall between his mother and his wife. The baby is safe, Mom, Ethan said, because you weren't there. Victoria stared at him, betrayed. Ethan. Don't, he said. Just don't. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Real police officers, uniformed and grim, appeared at the door, flanked by Madame Rose's security team. Mr. Henderson pointed at Victoria. That is her, he said. As the officers moved into the room, handcuffs gleaming under the hospital lights, the reality of the situation finally crashed down on Victoria Sterling. The facade was gone. The money was gone. The family was gone. And as the cold metal clicked around her wrists, the sound was louder than any auction gavel she had ever held. It was the sound of a life ending. Not mine, hers. The silence in the room was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on my chest, making it harder to breathe than the broken ribs already did. The private security team Madame Rose had brought men who looked like they were carved from granite had stepped back slightly, creating a perimeter around Victoria. But they had not yet put her in irons. They were waiting for a signal from the matriarch. I looked at Ethan. He was sitting in the plastic chair beside my bed, the one that looked too small for his broad shoulders. He was holding my hand, but his grip was loose, trembling. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the floor, at the scuff marks on the linoleum, as if the secrets of the universe were written there. I watched his face. I knew every line, every expression. I had studied him for 5 years with the devotion of a woman who desperately wanted to be understood. Usually, his face was open, kind, a little soft around the edges. The face of a man who avoided conflict at all costs. But now, something has hardened. The softness was gone, replaced by a jagged, raw look of devastation. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his mind, rewriting his entire history. He was replaying every dinner where he had told me to just ignore her comments. He was replaying every holiday where he had asked me to apologize for things I hadn't done. He was replaying the moment he asked me to sign the check for her emergency debts, assuring me she would pay us back. He was realizing that he hadn't been a peacemaker. He had been an accomplice. "Ethan," I whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath, a shuddering inhale that racked his entire body. Then, he slowly lifted his head. His eyes were dry now, but they were burning with a cold, terrifying intensity I had never seen before. "I am sorry," he said. It wasn't the reflexive apology he usually gave when he bumped into furniture. It was a soul-deep confession. I squeezed his hand. "I know, Ethan." "No, you don't," he said, his voice low and rough. "You don't know. I let this happen. I built the stage, and I let her stand on it. I thought if I just loved her enough, she would stop being so broken. I thought if we gave her enough money, she would finally be happy." He looked over his shoulder at Victoria, who was standing near the door, cornered by the security guards, her chest heaving with panic and indignation. "She is not broken, Abby," Ethan said, turning back to me. "She is just evil." He stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. He let go of my hand, and for a second, I felt a panic rise in me, a fear that he was walking away. But he wasn't walking away from me. He was walking toward her. He crossed the small hospital room. The sound of his footsteps was the only thing audible over the rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. Victoria saw him coming. She straightened her spine, instinctively trying to regain the height and authority she had held over him his entire life. She wiped her face, smearing her expensive mascara, and arranged her features into a look of wounded maternal pride. "Ethan," she said, her voice wavering but trying for firmness. "Ethan, listen to me. Do not let them do this. You know how dramatic your grandmother can be. You know how Abigail twists things. I am your mother. I gave you life." Ethan stopped 2 feet in front of her. He looked down at her. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He stood with his hands at his sides, completely still. "You gave me life," Ethan repeated calmly. "And last night, you tried to take the life of my daughter." "It was a misunderstanding," Victoria cried, reaching out to touch his arm. "I told you. I was confused. The signal was bad." "Don't," Ethan said. He didn't move away, but the word was like a slap. Victoria flinched and pulled her hand back. "I heard the recording." Mother Ethan said, "I heard your voice. You weren't confused. You were annoyed. You were annoyed that my wife dying was interrupting your party." "That is not true. I love you. I love this family." "You love the name," Ethan corrected. "You love the Sterling name. You love the house. You love credit cards. You love the status. But you do not love us. You never have." He took a step closer, invading her personal space for the first time in his life. "Do you remember when I was 10, he asked, "when I broke my arm falling off the horse? You didn't take me to the hospital for 3 hours because you were hosting a bridge tournament. You told me to go to my room and be quiet because I was embarrassing you. Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the memory. That was different. I was teaching you resilience. No, Ethan said. You were ignoring me, just like you ignored Abigail, just like you ignored Dad when he begged you to stop gambling. He looked her straight in the eye. You are a black hole, Mother. You suck the light out of everything to feed yourself, and I am done feeding you. Victoria's lip trembled. She looked at the security guards, then back at Ethan. What are you saying? I am saying that you are dead to me, Ethan said. The words hung in the air, absolute and final. From this moment on, you are not welcome in my house. Ethan continued, his voice gaining strength. You are not welcome at the hospital, and you are certainly, absolutely, never allowed near my daughter. Victoria gasped. You cannot do that. I have rights. I am her grandmother. You are nothing, Ethan shouted. The sudden volume made everyone jump. You are a stranger. You are a threat. If you come within 500 feet of my wife or my child, I will get a restraining order. I will have you arrested. I will treat you like the criminal you are. Victoria stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. She had never heard her son raise his voice at her. She had never seen him stand up straight. She had spent 34 years pruning him into a bonsai tree, small, decorative, and controlled. But the storm had broken the pot, and the tree was finally growing wild. How dare you, she hissed, after everything I sacrificed for you, you ungrateful, spineless little... She raised her hand and swung. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to reassert dominance. Her palm connected with Ethan's cheek with a sharp, stinging crack that echoed off the tiled walls. Slap. My heart jumped. I tried to sit up, ignoring the pain in my abdomen. Ethan. But Ethan didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't put a hand to his face. He didn't even blink. He just took the hit, absorbing the violence of it like a stone absorbing a wave. He looked at her, and then, terrifyingly, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a sad, broken smile of liberation. That is it, he said softly. That is all you have left. Isn't it violence and manipulation? Victoria stared at her own hand, stinging from the impact. She looked at Ethan's face, where a red mark was already blooming on his cheek. For the first time, she looked afraid. She realized that the slap hadn't worked. The weapon she had used to control him fear was empty. Madame Rose, who had been watching silently from her chair, tapped her cane on the floor. Are you finished, Victoria? She asked coolly. Victoria spun around. This is your fault. You turned him against me. Madame Rose stood up. She walked over to where Ethan stood, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. She looked at Victoria with the disdain one might reserve for a cockroach. You did this to yourself, Rose said. And now, I am going to finish it. Rose motioned to Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. As of this morning, 9 o'clock, Madame Rose announced, I have executed a clause in the family trust, the morality clause. Victoria's face went gray. No, you can't. I can. And I have. Rose said, Your stipend is canceled. Your access to the family accounts is revoked. The credit cards in your purse have been deactivated. The lease on the Jaguar has been terminated. She took a step closer. You are destitute. Victoria, you do not have a penny to your name. The clothes on your back are the only assets you possess. And frankly, knowing Abigail paid for them, I should strip those off you too. Victoria began to shake. Real, visceral tremors ran through her body. It wasn't the loss of her son that broke her. It wasn't the shame of the slapped face. It was the money. The money was her oxygen, and Madame Rose had just cut the line. Grandmother, please, Victoria stammered, falling to her knees. It was a grotesque sight. The proud woman in the designer coat kneeling on the hospital floor. I have nowhere to go. I have bills. I have debts. You cannot leave me with nothing. I am leaving you with exactly what you earned, Rose said cold and hard. Nothing. Victoria looked around the room. her eyes darting like a trapped animal. She looked at Ethan, who had turned his face away, refusing to look at her. She looked at the security guards, who were impassive. Then, her eyes landed on me. She scrambled across the floor toward the bed. She grabbed the metal railing, her knuckles white. "Abigail," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Abigail, please. You are a mother now, you understand. You cannot let them do this to me." I looked down at her. This woman had tormented me for 5 years. She had stolen my money. She had insulted my family. She had nearly killed me and my child. And now, she was begging. I thought I would feel satisfied. I thought I would feel triumph. But all I felt was exhaustion and a profound, icy clarity. "Help me," Abigail Victoria sobbed, reaching through the bars of the bed to touch my blanket. "Tell Ethan to stop. Tell Rose to give me another chance. I will pay you back. I swear I will work. I will do anything. Just don't let them ruin me." I looked at her hand on my blanket, the manicured nails, the diamond ring that I knew was a fake because she had pawned the real one years ago. I reached out and slowly, deliberately, peeled her fingers off the railing. "Victoria," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a judge's gavel. She looked up at me, hope flaring in her eyes. "Yes, Abigail." I looked at her with eyes that had seen the other side of death. "You said you would do anything I asked." "Yes, anything." "Then run," I said. Victoria blinked, confused. "What?" "Go," I said, pointing to the door. "Run as fast as you can." "Why?" she whispered. "Because," I said, leaning forward slightly, ignoring the pull of my stitches, "Mr. Henderson didn't just call security, he called the NYPD Fraud Division." Victoria's face went slack. "The loan document," I said, "the one you tried to make me sign, the one where you forged my signature on the bank application last year, the one Madame Rose found on your desk." I saw the color drain out of her face until she looked like a corpse. "They are coming up the elevator right now." "Victoria," I said softly, "grand larceny, identity theft, forgery, that is 20 years in prison." Victoria let out a strangled sound. She scrambled backward, crabbing away from the bed on her hands and knees. She looked at the door. She looked at Madame Rose, who just raised an eyebrow and stepped aside, clearing the path. "Run!" "Victoria," Ethan said from behind her. His voice was hollow. "Before they put you in a cage." Victoria didn't wait. She scrambled to her feet, stumbling over her own coat. She looked at us one last time, a look of pure terror and hatred, and then she bolted. She ran out of the room, her heels slipping on the floor. We heard her running down the hallway, gasping for breath, the sound of her flight echoing off the sterile walls. I listened until the sound of her footsteps faded. I sank back into the pillows, the adrenaline leaving my body, leaving me shaking. "Is she gone?" I whispered. Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed. He reached out and touched my face, his fingers gentle near the cut on my forehead. "Yes," he said, tears finally spilling down his bruised cheek. "She is gone." Madame Rose walked to the window and looked out. "She won't get far," Rose said, her voice grim. "But let her run. Let her feel the fear she made you feel. The police will pick her up soon enough." I closed my eyes, and for the first time since the crash, for the first time in 5 years, the knot of anxiety in my chest began to loosen. She was gone. The monster was gone. And I was still here, broken, battered, but still here. The transition from the antiseptic white of Mount Sinai Hospital to the velvet-draped halls of Madame Rose's estate felt like stepping from a war zone into a fortress. It had been 7 days since the crash, 7 days since my body was broken open to bring my daughter into the world, and 7 days since my life was dismantled by the woman who was supposed to be my family. I sat in a wheelchair by the window of the guest suite, looking out at the sprawling, manicured gardens of the Sterling ancestral home in Greenwich. My left leg was still encased in heavy plaster, propped up on a cushioned stool. My abdomen, stitched and stapled, throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that served as a constant reminder of the night I almost died. But the physical pain was manageable. It was the silence that terrified me. My daughter, whom we had named Hope, was finally out of the incubator but remained in the hospital for observation. I had been discharged yesterday, but I had nowhere to go. Our brownstone in the city, the home where I had painted the nursery yellow, the home I had thought was ours, was gone. The bank had seized it 3 days ago. Victoria's secret second mortgage had defaulted, and the foreclosure notice was slapped on the door before I could even pack a bag. We were homeless, wealthy, in theory, but homeless in reality. Ethan was staying at the hospital, sleeping in the on-call room to be near Hope, while I was here, under the protection of the Iron Matriarch. Madame Rose walked into the room. She moved slower today, leaning heavily on her cane. The events of the last week had aged her, but her eyes were still sharp, scanning me for weakness. "You are brooding, Abigail," she said, sitting in the wingback chair opposite me. "It does not suit you." "I am not brooding," I said, my voice sounding thin in the large room. "I am waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For the other shoe to drop," I replied. "Victoria is out there. You let her run." "She ran because she is a coward," Rose said, pouring herself a cup of tea. "And cowards, when cornered, usually hide." But Victoria wasn't just a coward. She was a narcissist, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that a narcissist does not accept defeat. She rewrites the narrative until she is the victim. My phone buzzed on the side table. I flinched. Every ring, every vibration, made my heart hammer against my ribs. It was a text from a friend in the city, a fellow architect. She had sent me a screenshot of a post from a private Upper East Side community forum. "Have you heard of it? Poor Victoria Sterling is staying at a Motel 6 in New Jersey. She says her daughter-in-law mentally snapped after the accident and kicked her out. She says she is terrified for her grandchild." I showed the phone to Rose. She glanced at it and snorted. "Pathetic," she muttered. "She is trying to win the court of public opinion because she knows she has lost the court of law." But she was not just trying to win sympathy. She was building a case. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. It was not a social call. It was a process server. He was a young man, looking uncomfortable as he stood in the grand foyer under the gaze of Rose's security team. He asked for Abigail Hartman. When the guard wheeled me out, he thrust a thick envelope into my lap and practically ran back to his car. I opened the envelope. My hands were shaking so badly I tore the paper. I pulled out the legal documents. The header hit me like a physical blow. Emergency motion for temporary custody and guardianship. I read the first paragraph, and the air left my lungs. Petitioner Victoria Sterling. Respondent Abigail Hartman. I read on, my vision blurring with tears of rage and terror. The document was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that I had suffered a psychotic break following the trauma of the accident. It claimed that I was heavily addicted to opioids, prescribed for my injuries, and was incapable of caring for a newborn. But the worst part was the affidavit from a man named Dr. Aris Thorne, a psychiatrist I had never met. He claimed to have treated me for violent outbursts and postpartum depression with homicidal ideation. Victoria was asking the court for immediate, temporary custody of Hope. She was citing grandparents' rights and the immediate danger to the child. And then, in the fine print on page 12, the true motive was revealed. As the legal guardian of the minor heir, the petitioner requests access to the Sterling Family Trust to provide for the child's security, housing, and medical needs, estimated at $50,000 per month. She didn't want the baby. She wanted the stipend. She wanted to use my daughter as a key to unlock the vault Madame Rose had closed. I screamed. I threw the papers across the room. They scattered like dead leaves on the marble floor. "She wants my baby," I sobbed, clutching my chest. "Rose, she is trying to take Hope. She says I am a junkie. She says I am crazy." Ethan ran into the room. He had just arrived from the hospital, looking exhausted. He saw the papers on the floor and me hyperventilating in the wheelchair. "Abby, what is it?" I pointed to the papers. "Read it. Your mother. She is suing us. She is trying to take custody." Ethan fell to his knees and gathered the documents. As he read, his face went from pale to a deep, dark red. The veins in his neck stood out. "This is insanity," he spat. "This doctor, I have heard of him. Thorne, he is a hired gun. He writes whatever diagnosis you pay him for. He lost his license in Florida 10 years ago and just got it reinstated here." "It doesn't matter," I cried. "It is a court order. Ethan, we have a hearing in 48 hours. If the judge believes her, if they take hope away." I felt a panic attack rising, a black tide choking me. I couldn't breathe. I was back in the car, trapped, crushed, helpless. Madame Rose stood up. The sound of her cane hitting the floor was sharp and loud, cutting through the hysteria. "Stop it," she commanded. "Both of you." She walked over to the scattered papers and poked one with the tip of her cane. "So," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "she wants to play the legal game. She wants to drag our name through the mud of family court. She is going to win. Rose." I wept. "She is a manipulator. She will cry to the judge. She will say we are homeless. She will say I am on painkillers, which I am." Madame Rose looked at me. Her expression was unreadable. "Do you trust me?" "Abigail." I looked at the old woman who had saved my life. Yes. "Then dry your tears. Tears are for victims, and you are not a victim anymore. You are a Sterling." She turned to her head of security, a man named Marcus. "Marcus, bring me the laptop, and bring me the external hard drive from the safe, the one labeled the aviary." Rose sat down at the heavy oak dining table. She opened the laptop Marcus placed in front of her. She plugged in the drive. "Come here," she said to Ethan. "Wheel your wife over here." Ethan pushed my chair to the table. We looked at the screen. Rose opened a folder. It contained hundreds of video files, dated and time-stamped. They went back 5 years. "I have known what Victoria is for a long time," Rose said softly. "I knew she was bleeding the accounts dry. I knew she was a liar. But I needed proof of something more than just greed. I needed proof of character." She clicked on a file dated 3 weeks ago. The video opened. It was a high-definition view of Victoria's living room. The living room where I had been humiliated countless times. The angle was high, likely from a camera hidden in the chandelier or the crown molding. In the video, Victoria was sitting with a man, a shady-looking man in a cheap suit. I turned up the volume. "So if we fabricate the loan documents," Victoria was saying, swirling a glass of wine, "Abigail will have to pay it. She is too proud to let the bank foreclose. It is risky." "Victoria," the man said, "if she finds out—" "She won't." Victoria laughed. It was a cruel, cackling sound. "She is an idiot. She thinks I care about her. She thinks if she buys me enough gifts, I will finally be mommy. It is pathetic. I will milk that cow until she is dry, and then I will send her back to the gutter she came from." I stared at the screen, my stomach turning. Hearing it was different than knowing it. Rose clicked another file. This one was from the night of the gala, just before she left. Victoria was on the phone. "Yes, Thorne, I need a contingency plan. If the girl survives the birth, I need leverage. Draft up some medical records. Make her look unstable. I don't care what you put in there. Say she hears voices. Say she hurts herself. Just make sure that if anything happens, I get the kid. The trust fund is tied to the heir." Ethan made a sound like a wounded animal. He turned away, burying his face in his hands. "She planned it," he whispered. "She planned this before the accident." Rose closed the laptop. "I installed the system 4 years ago," she said. "I wanted to see where my money was going. I saw everything: the gambling, the lovers, the forgery, and the conspiracy to commit fraud against this family." She looked at me. "She thinks she has trapped you, Abigail. She thinks she can walk into a courtroom with a fake doctor and a sob story and take your child." Rose's eyes glittered with a cold, hard light. "She does not know that I have enough footage to put her and her lawyer in federal prison for the rest of their natural lives." "So we go to the police?" I asked, hope fluttering in my chest. "We show them this?" "No," Rose said. "Not yet." "Why?" Ethan asked. "Why wait?" Because, Rose said, a slow smile spreading across her face, if we go to the police now, she gets arrested quietly. She pleads out. She disappears. Rose leaned forward. I want her destroyed, she hissed. I want her to stand in front of the people whose approval she craves so desperately, and I want her to be stripped naked. I want her to believe she has won, right up until the moment the trap snaps shut. What are you planning? I asked, a shiver running down my spine. Rose tapped her fingers on the table. In 3 days, the baby will be 1 month old. It is a tradition in the Sterling family to host a Welcome to the World celebration, a naming ceremony. But Hope is in the hospital, I said. We will hold it anyway, Rose said. We will announce that the heir is being presented. We will invite everyone, the senator, the bankers, the socialites, and we will let it slip that I'm stepping down as the trustee, that I am naming a new guardian for the fortune. She looked at the legal papers on the floor. Victoria is desperate. She is hungry. If she hears that I am handing over the keys to the kingdom, she will come. She won't be able to help herself. She will come with her lawyer and her court order, thinking she can bully us into submission in front of a crowd. And when she does, I asked. Rose patted the hard drive. Then we play the movies, she said, and we let New York see exactly who Victoria Sterling is. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated activity. Madame Rose's team went to work. Invitations were sent out on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold. The rumor mill was fed with precision. The story was planted. Madame Rose was old. She was tired, and she was looking to settle the family affairs before she returned to Europe. I spent the time preparing myself. I looked in the mirror. I saw a woman with dark circles under her eyes, a woman in a wheelchair, a woman with scars. But I also saw the woman who had crawled out of a crushed car to save her child. I was not the victim Victoria thought I was. I was the bait. On the morning of the party, I received one final text from an unknown number. See you soon, dear. Kiss the baby for me. V. It was meant to terrify me. It was meant to make me crumble. Instead, I showed it to Ethan. He read it, and for the first time in a week, he didn't look sad. He looked ready. Let her come, he said. The stage was set. The grand ballroom of the Greenwich estate was decorated with thousands of white roses. The champagne was chilled. The guests, the vultures of high society, were arriving in their limousines, eager for gossip, eager to see the fall of the House of Sterling. I sat in my wheelchair at the top of the grand staircase, hidden by the shadows of the balcony. I watched them enter. I waited for the woman in the green dress. I waited for the monster. And as the clock struck 7, the heavy oak doors swung open. She was here. Victoria walked in. She looked haggard, thinner than before, but she was wearing a defiant smile and a dress that I recognized it was one she had stolen from my closet before she fled. Flanking her was a short, oily man carrying a briefcase. Doctor, Thorne, or perhaps her lawyer. It didn't matter. She scanned the room, her eyes hungry. She was looking for the money. She was looking for the victory she felt she was owed. She didn't look up. She didn't see me watching her. She didn't see the large screen descending silently behind the stage curtain. She walked into the trap with her head held high, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet was about to open up and swallow her whole. I gripped the arms of my wheelchair. Showtime. Mother, I whispered. The ballroom of the Sterling estate in Greenwich had been transformed into a winter garden, a deliberate echo of the season that had almost claimed my life. Thousands of white roses cascaded from the balconies, their scent masking the underlying tension that hummed through the room like a high-voltage wire. It was the night of the 1-month celebration for my daughter. Hope, in the world of the ultra-wealthy. This was usually a time for polite cooing over a bassinet and the exchange of silver rattles, but tonight, everyone knew it was something else. Madame Rose had played her hand with the precision of a grandmaster. She had let whispers drift through the country clubs and boardrooms of Manhattan whispers that she was frail, that she was stepping down, and that the control of the Sterling billions was up for grabs. The vultures had gathered. Senators, bankers, socialites, and rivals filled the room, their eyes darting around, hungry for the scent of blood. I stood in the wings of the stage, hidden by a heavy velvet curtain. I was no longer the broken woman in the hospital bed. I was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk, tailored to conceal the surgical corset that held my healing ribs together. My left leg was still in a brace, hidden beneath the hem, but I was standing. I refused to meet this night in a wheelchair. I leaned heavily against Ethan, who stood beside me like a sentinel. In my arms, wrapped in a blanket of hand-spun lace, slept Hope. She was small, fragile, a miracle of breath and bone. She was the reason I was standing. She was the reason I had turned my pain into armor. "Are you ready?" Ethan whispered. His hand rested on my waist, his touch firm and grounding. He looked different tonight. The boyish uncertainty was gone, replaced by the hard resolve of a man who has drawn a line in the sand. I looked down at my daughter, then up at him. "I have been ready since the moment she woke up," I said. The orchestra stopped playing. A hush fell over the room as the heavy double doors at the far end of the ballroom were thrown open. It was not us. It was not the hosts. It was the uninvited guest. Victoria Sterling entered the room, and she did not come alone. Flanking her were two men in cheap suits, her legal team, and behind them, a small phalanx of photographers she had tipped off. She looked thin, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, and her eyes were manic. She was wearing a red dress, a color of aggression, a color that screamed for attention. She walked into the room with the entitlement of a deposed queen returning to claim her throne. She believed the rumors. She believed Rose was weak. She believed that with enough noise, enough scandal, she could bully us into a settlement just to make her go away. The crowd parted for her, a mixture of shock and delight on their faces. This was the drama they had come for. Madame Rose stood on the small dais at the front of the room, leaning on her cane. She watched Victoria approach with a small, cold smile. She did not signal security. She let the wolf walk right into the pen. Victoria stopped in the center of the room, surrounded by the elite of New York. She spotted the cameras she had brought, made sure they were rolling, and then she pointed a shaking finger at the empty stage. "Where are they?" she shouted. Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Where is the woman who stole my grandchild?" A ripple of whispers ran through the crowd. "I am here to demand justice," Victoria proclaimed. Turning to face the guests, she pitched her voice to a tragic tremolo. "My daughter-in-law is unfit. She is mentally unstable. She has kept me from my own flesh and blood for a month. I have a court order. I have rights." She waved a sheaf of papers in the air. "They threw me out into the street," she cried. Tears practiced, perfect tears welling in her eyes. "The woman who built this family. They left me with nothing while they wallowed in luxury. And now, I hear they are planning to give the family fortune to a drug addict." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Ethan stiffened beside me. I put a hand on his chest. "Not yet. Let her finish. Let her dig the hole so deep she can never climb out." Victoria turned to Madame Rose. "Grandmother," she yelled, "do not let Abigail destroy this legacy. Look at the medical records. She is on opioids. She is hallucinating. Give me custody of the child. It is the only way to save the Sterling name." The crowd murmured. Doubt was a contagious disease, and Victoria was spreading it effectively. I saw people glancing at each other, eyebrows raised. Was it true? Was the new mother unstable? Madame Rose raised her hand. The room fell silent instantly. "Are you quite finished?" Victoria Rose asked. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "I will not be silenced," Victoria snapped. "I have the press here. I will tell the world what you have done to me." Rose nodded slowly. "Actually," she said, her tone conversational, "we were hoping you would say that." Rose gestured to the side of the stage. "Come out, Abigail." Ethan took a deep breath. He wrapped his arm tighter around me. Together, we stepped out from behind the curtain. A collective gasp went through the room. I did not look like a drug addict. I did not look unstable. I stood tall, the diamonds at my throat catching the light, my husband at my side, and my daughter in my arms. I looked like a matriarch in the making. I walked to the edge of the dais. I looked down at Victoria. She faltered for a second, surprised by my appearance, but she quickly recovered, sneering at me. "Look at her!" she shrieked. "Look how she holds the baby." "She is shaking. She is probably high right now." I did not speak. I did not defend myself. I simply looked at her with a pity so profound it felt like a weapon. Madame Rose stepped up to the microphone. "Welcome, everyone," she said. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate the life of Hope Sterling." She paused, looking directly at Victoria. "There has been much speculation about the future of this family, about inheritance, about who is fit to lead." Victoria straightened up, clutching her papers, thinking this was the moment of capitulation. "Tonight," Rose continued, "I intended to announce the restructuring of the family trust, and I will, but Victoria has raised some serious concerns. She claims she is a victim. She claims she is a loving grandmother who has been wronged. She claims she is the only one fit to protect this fortune." Rose smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just closed the cage door. "We believe in transparency in this family," Rose said. "So, before we sign any papers, I think it is important that we all review the evidence. Victoria brought her cameras, but we have cameras of our own." Rose signaled to the technician at the back of the room. "Lights, please." The chandeliers dimmed. A massive screen, 20 feet wide, descended from the ceiling behind us. Victoria looked confused. "What is this? What are you doing?" "Watch," Madame Rose commanded. The screen flickered to life. The image was grainy at first, then sharpened into high definition. It was footage from inside a casino. The timestamp in the corner read 6 months ago. The room gasped. There, on the screen, was Victoria Sterling. She was sitting at a high-stakes baccarat table in Las Vegas. She looked disheveled, frantic. "Put it all on player," the video Victoria slurred, shoving a stack of chips onto the felt. "I need to win this back. I took it from my husband's pension fund. If I lose this, I have to forge another check." The audio was pristine. Every word rang out across the silent ballroom. Real Victoria, standing on the floor, went pale. That is a lie. That is a deep fake. The video cut. New scene. It was a bedroom. Victoria was lounging in a silk robe, holding a glass of wine. A young man, barely older than Ethan, was massaging her feet. "God, she is so pathetic," video Victoria said, laughing. "Abigail. She follows me around like a puppy. I charged $5,000 to her credit card, and she thanked me for letting her pay it. She thinks she is buying a mother. Stupid girl. Once the old hag dies and I get the estate, I am kicking Abigail and her boring son out on the street." The crowd in the ballroom turned to look at Victoria. The whispers were no longer doubtful. They were horrified. "Stop it!" Victoria screamed, lunging toward the technician. "Turn it off." Security guards stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. They did not touch her. They just stood there, walls of muscle, forcing her to watch. "But that is just gossip," Madame Rose said over the microphone. "Distasteful, yes, but not a criminal. Let us look at something more recent." The screen shifted again. The date was 2 weeks ago. The setting was Victoria's living room. This was the footage Rose had shown us in private, but seeing it here, projected 10 feet tall in front of 300 witnesses, gave it a devastating power. Victoria was pacing the room. A man sat on her sofa, the same oily lawyer standing next to her right now. "We need a narrative," video Victoria said. Her voice was cold, calculating. The accident wasn't fatal. She survived. That is a problem. The lawyer on the screen nodded. "We can file for custody, but we need grounds. Neglect abuse." "Fabricate it," video Victoria snapped. "Say she is an addict. Say she is popping OxyContin like candy. Get Thorne to write a report saying she is suicidal." The lawyer on the screen hesitated. "That is perjury." "Victoria, if we get caught—" "We won't get caught," video Victoria yelled. "She is weak. She will crumble. I just need temporary custody. Once I have the kid, I have access to the heirs trust fund. That is $50,000 a month. I can pay off the gambling debts. I just need the baby as a key. The video froze on Victoria's face, twisted in a snarl of greed. I just need the baby as a key. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the hum of the projector. Then, slowly, the lights came back up. I looked at the crowd. The socialites, the bankers, the press. They were all staring at Victoria with expressions of revulsion. She was stripped bare. There was no loving grandmother left. There was only a monster who would sell her own blood for a casino chip. Victoria stood in the center of the room. She was shaking. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She looked at the lawyer beside her, but he was already backing away, trying to vanish into the crowd, realizing his career was over. Madame Rose stepped forward to the edge of the stage. She looked down at Victoria. "You wanted a court of law." "Victoria," she asked softly, "we decided to give you a court of public opinion first." Victoria looked up. Her eyes were wild, darting from face to face. She saw no sympathy. She saw only judgment. "You set me up," she hissed. "You lured me here." "We invited the truth," Rose corrected, "and the truth has a way of arriving uninvited." Victoria let out a scream of pure, impotent rage. "You think this finishes me?" she screeched. "I am Victoria Sterling. I know secrets about everyone in this room." She spun around, pointing a finger at a senator. "You I know about your mistress." She pointed at a banker. "And you I know about offshore accounts." People recoiled. She was flailing, lashing out like a drowning rat trying to drag everyone else down with her. Madame Rose tapped the microphone. "Mr. Henderson," Rose said, "I believe the authorities have seen enough." The doors at the back of the room opened again. This time, it was not a waiter with champagne. It was a squad of police officers, led by a detective holding a warrant. Victoria froze. She looked at the police, then back at us. "No," she whispered, "not here, not in front of them." Ethan stepped forward. He walked to the edge of the stage, standing right above her. He looked down at the mother who had viewed him as an investment, and at the wife she had tried to destroy. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "You always wanted to be the center of attention. Mother," he said, "now you are." The police moved in. The detective stepped up to Victoria. "Victoria Sterling," he said, his voice brisk and professional. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, forgery, and child endangerment." He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metal glinted under the chandeliers. Victoria backed away, bumping into a table. A glass vase crashed to the floor, shattering. "You cannot arrest me," she screamed. "I am a victim. They doctored the tapes." "Put your hands behind your back," the detective ordered. Victoria looked at the crowd, searching for an ally. "Help me. Someone help me." But the crowd was a sea of stone. These were people who valued reputation above all else. Victoria was now a radioactive isotope. To touch her was to die socially. The officers grabbed her arms. She fought them. She kicked and screamed, losing all semblance of dignity. Her red dress tore at the shoulder. Her hair came loose. As they clicked the cuffs onto her wrists, she looked up at the stage one last time. She locked eyes with me. "I hate you," she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "I hate you. You ruined everything." I looked at her. I shifted hope in my arms, holding her a little tighter. "I didn't ruin anything. Victoria," I said calmly. "I just turned on the lights." The police dragged her toward the exit. She was still screaming, cursing Ethan, cursing Rose, cursing the day I was born. The photographers she had hired were now snapping photos of her downfall, the flashes blinding her as she was hauled away like common trash. When the doors finally closed behind her, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was the silence of a storm that had passed. Madame Rose cleared her throat. "My apologies for the interruption," she said, her voice steady. "Now, as I was saying, I am restructuring the trust." She turned to me. From this day forward, the entire Sterling estate, including the assets recovered from Victoria's accounts, will be placed in a protective trust for Hope Sterling, and the sole trustee, with full executive power. She pointed her cane at me, is Abigail Hartman Sterling. The crowd erupted into applause. It was polite, shocking, but genuine. They respected power, and tonight they had seen where the true power lay. I looked at Ethan. He was crying, silent tears of relief. He kissed my forehead, then he kissed the top of Hope's head. "We are free," he whispered. I looked out at the room, at the flowers, at the faces of the people who had judged me for years. I didn't care about their applause. I didn't care about the money. I looked at the empty space where Victoria had stood. The air seemed cleaner without her. I walked to the microphone. "Thank you," I said. My voice was strong. "Now, if you will excuse us, my daughter needs to sleep, and so do I." I turned and walked off the stage, leaving the spotlight behind. I didn't need it. I had the only thing that mattered. I had won. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Victoria's punishment. Did she get what she deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Scarlet Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and smash that hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who love a good tale of justice served.